Oh, I got to plug it in. Plug in my camera. Well, maybe, why not? It's not plugged in.
Morning.
Morning. Morning, Justin.
How's the tax this morning?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Good, man.
So what day is your anniversary? Is it the 6th?
10th.
The 10th. Well, happy almost anniversary.
Thank you.
I see you missed another trip to Alabama.
Yep. We'll get out there eventually. I have a feeling.
Looks like you're in your basement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looks like you're outside. Looks nice out.
Yeah. We're on the banks of the, here, pronounce it correctly. from
Coosa.
Coosa River. Yeah. I always say Coosa. Coosa.
Just looking at your thing.
The link today on the email, when I had pulled it up on my computer, it didn't really have a link on it for the River Share talk today.
I had the same problem.
Yeah, so I don't have the listserv that Paula sent everything to, or else I would have sent out an email this morning and given people the link. So hopefully we get some folks. If not, we'll record it and they can watch it online later. So
All will be good.
we'll give it a minute or two, I guess, and then we'll let you take over. So
Sounds good.
hey, good morning, Paula.
Good morning.
You look outside too.
Oh, virtual background. But this is one of my favorite that's the background is one of my favorite hiking spots.
Oh, nice. Super. All right. Well, I'd like to introduce today Greg and Andrea Taillacq. They're going to be talking to us about a watershed restoration that they've been working on for a number of years in southern Colorado. We've been blessed that Greg and Andrea have been involved with River Shared since almost the start of River Shared. So with that, I'll let you guys kind of take over and tell us what you're talking about. Are you able to share the screen this morning, Andrea?
I am.
Good.
So I'm gonna get this on the right screen so I can see it. And then I'm gonna get everything set up so I can still see you guys as well. There we go. So this morning we're gonna talk about this watershed assessment that we have been involved with since 2018. And this was one of the projects that was kind of affected by the pandemic, because water was no longer a key focus when the pandemic hit, and all of the funding that had been secured for us to start in 2020 was stripped. And so we had to wait 1 year for that funding to be restored, and we were able to begin the assessment in 2021. Let's see here. We need the notes. So our story starts in southern Colorado, where this watershed is located. And Now we have other Zoom issues. All right, the Culebra Watershed is in south central Colorado, a small tributary of the Rio Grande that last flowed to the Rio Grande in the 1940s. This assessment consisted of 12 tasks, and it was developed through a very lengthy stakeholder process, of which was completed before we actually bid on the project. From this, the major driving factor, what everybody asked us throughout the assessment was if we had projects, where's the project list? Everybody wanted to know what the project list was so that they could move forward. And the driver for this was that they needed the project list before they could compete with others to receive grant funding. To help understand the assessment, a bit of history is needed. The Culebra watershed is a place where numerous groups of people have mixed throughout history. Prior to about 1630s, when Spanish explorers arrived, many indigenous native people occupied these lands as hunting and gathering grounds. Groups that have been documented include Ute bands, including the Capote, Tabawatch, Mowich, Uinna, Wemanooch, Yamps, and Grand Rica. Navajos and Apaches have also been documented in this area. Enemies of the Utes included the Kiowa, Apaches, Arapaho, Comanches, and eventually the Spanish and other Europeans. So we've got a lot of groups moving in and out of this area. More and more people traveled through the region looking for gold and trapping for furs. As claims are being staked, the lands became part of Mexico with when independence was gained from Spain. So we start under Spanish rule, and then we have transitioned to Mexican rule. There was a guy named Charles Beaubien who applied for a land grant for his son, Narcisco Beaubien, and his business partner, Stephen Lee Lewis, in 1843. The grant was known as the Sangre de Cristo Land Grant. Both Narcisco Beaubien and Stephen Lewis Lee were killed in a fight in 1847. Resulting in Charles inheriting the land grant from his son and business partner. At the end of the Mexican-American War, this region became part of the United States with the signing of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. 3 years later, in 1851, the town of San Luis was established. This is the oldest town in Colorado. And the following year, the San Luis People's Ditch was appropriated. In the region, there are 7 villages that were identified, and these are places where people still live today, and they are what established the communities. These villages are established along acequias or ditches. Lands are divided into vara strips, a concept brought into the area by Spanish descendants. Vara strips give each settler access to the creek, and the acequia lands provided across the ecosystems, giving everyone gardens, pasture, and uplands. Acequias are maintained by the community and operated with one family, one vote, ensuring that everyone has equal representation. Water is shared amongst all the families, giving priority to gardens first, with any extra allocated to pastures. Sharing occurred across all of the acequias, with everyone sharing. So it didn't matter when you were there, they took care of everybody. In addition to the varas, the settlers were granted access by Beaubien to the forests of the watershed. With this access, settlers had summer grazing for their livestock, which included cattle and sheep, abundant supplies of timber for building structures, fences, and wood burning, all the needed elements for sustainment. In 1861, William Gilpin was appointed by Lincoln to be the first governor of the territory of Colorado, serving from March 25th, 1861 to March 26th, 1862. Gilpin went on to cause an array of financial problems for the territory and was removed by President Lincoln. In 1963, with the force of foreign investors, Gilpin purchased the Sangre de Cristo land grant from Beaubien's heirs for a mere $41,000. With this purchase, the investors attempted to attract settlers to this new land and treating the inhabitants as squatters and trespassers. In 1869, the United States Freehold Land and Immigration Company was established to promote and encourage immigration to and settlements on the 500,000 acres Costilla Estates. 25 years after the town of San Luis was established in 1876, Colorado became a state, once again changing the rules of which everybody was operating under. As a state, Colorado started to establish rules for how water would be divided, utilizing concepts from mining claims, applying the doctrine of first prior appropriations, aka first in time, first in right. This system differed from the acequia tradition in that it gave preference to those ditches that could claim to be first. In 1889, Colorado held its first adjudication, or water court, for this district, establishing the San Luis Peoples Ditch as the #1 water right in the state of Colorado, and establishing decrees for a total of 23 ditches at the time. But the Freehold Company came in a little bit behind, and in an attempt to develop the resources for the settlers, the Freehold Company needed water, which had been granted to the original settlers in the 1889 decree. In an effort to take this water, Freehold filed in the U.S. Circuit Court for the District of Colorado in 1900 a request to transfer water from the settlers to the company. This request was granted by the federal courts. The only problem here is that water is administered by the state, not the federal courts, bringing to light the validity of these decrees, known as the Tailwaters decrees. Eventually, Freehold sold the lands to the Costilla Estates Development Company in 1902, who continued to harass and obstruct the rights of the settlers, including those rights to use the lands that were considered communal. The people brought in by the Costilla Estates Development Company were likely at an advantage over the settlers because they spoke English. Many of the settlers spoke only Spanish and likely had some difficulties navigating the new rules being put into place. In 1960, the mountain tract was sold to Jack Taylor, a lumberman, who restricted access to the summer grazing lands and pursued claims in the U.S. District Court to clear the lands from any other claim. Taylor closed access to the lands and began a very lengthy court battle over access rights. This denied the people access for their grazing lands and timber resources. However, after one of the lengthiest battles, rights were restored by the Colorado Supreme Court in 2002. And this brings us to the assessment, which was needed because in 2002, we have a situation where the watershed must again be shared amongst the property owner, who currently and has been since the 1960s is a billionaire, and the original settlers and the heirs of those settlers, also known as the key holders. And so I'm just going to go through some of the data and stuff that was collected as part of the assessment, and realizing that the background of this is where everybody wanted to know what projects need to occur. And this guy worked for Dave as a 5SSR intern. This is Maxwell Linder, and he was an awesome help. So one of the things we did was look at aerial imagery, and there were claims that the clear-cut logging that occurred in the 1960s caused a lot of sediment to come down. And with the 1965 aerial imagery, we can see that the sediment did come down. And in fact, the channel had also been moved. So we have multiple factors moving in here. The red lines are where the channel is now. The tree line is probably where the channel was historically. We also assessed riparian health, and Alaterra did this for us. and looked visually at each of the sections to determine whether the riparian vegetation was in excellent, good, fair, or poor condition. Ultimately, most of the degradation was associated with channel incision. We also looked at the fisheries health, measuring the standard fast slow pool distributions, macroinvertebrate habitats. We were able to collect cross sections and generate a regional mini curve. And then we were also able to take this a little bit further and look at, if we use digital elevation models from 10-meter DEMs and just classify based on slope, how close can we get to the stream classification? And each of the boxes represents, hey, we got the same stream classification, and then the dots outside of the boxes say we were off, and none of them were off by more than one classification group. We looked at the available hydrography data. And so there is one stream flow gauge operated in the basin, which is affected significantly by diversions and a reservoir. And we see that this is the flood frequency analysis using the data from that gauge. Now, they also, when they administer water in Colorado, one of the things that the water commissioner is charged with is keeping records. And the records here are poor at best. But if we kind of use the diversion records as a surrogate, we see a vastly different flood frequency analysis than we do if we use the gauge. And we also have to take into account, if we're doing trend analysis, we see, oh, well, if we use all the data, we see increasing water supplies. But what really happened was that the state realized that they needed to keep track of all the ditches. And so from this point forward, there's data for all the ditches. Prior to that, you are missing most of the smaller ditches. The area was one of the first in Colorado that had the 1 meter LiDAR data collected. And so we were able to use that and pull cross sections and look at some of the places where the channel had been moved. In this case, the channel was moved to the right, closer to this terrace for a water diversion structure. And then this landowner has continued to remove the vegetation and keep that straight configuration. This was likely used to move a tributary point upstream, so it was accessible to this diversion structure, enabling them to take more water. The only town in the basin is San Luis, and it is definitely in a flood zone and is actually a very difficult area to model because of the multiple flows. We were able to, one of the community concerns was water quality and the effects that that has on the people, and some of the health issues they've had with the people have been attributed to the water quality. So we did water quality sampling at the bottom of each of the tributaries because there's not a whole lot of data in the basin. And then we were able to do field parameters throughout the basin to look at the changes in water quality. In the rangeland assessment, which was a really hot topic throughout this project, we worked with Open Range Consulting to do remote sensing on the all of the meadow areas. And the first task that had to be completed was identifying where those meadow areas were. And then they went through and used aerial imagery to classify what types of vegetation were in each of those areas. And this graph on the right, we can see this shift, which was likely caused by logging. So this is the greenness of the data, is essentially how you can look at that. And it's looking really good, and then it drops significantly. We also looked at some of the impacts to wildlife. Elk and deer are very coveted inhabitants and enjoyed for hunting and provide meat. They also are used for trophy hunting. And so one of the things was looking at fencing. The Forest Health Group, this was SWCA, looked at stand exams and how the groups could start to implement mitigation measures, as fire has become probably the most destructive and most concerning risk to the watershed. And likewise, we also did debris flow modeling, looking at the potential for debris flows if there were a fire. As part of this, we looked at the community perception through interviews and how they perceive the basin and what they thought should be done. And overall, 75% of landowners felt the community can work together to improve the overall condition of the watershed. When we did the rangeland assessment, and we just wrapped that up a couple weeks ago, was that really there was no range management. And with that brought a lot of concerns for what was being done. We have these people that were granted access in 2002, but there's no governance. So it's a free-for-all. Everybody just takes their cattle up there and lets them go. And so really a lot of the projects revolve around bringing people back together, because when they settled, there was community, and the Asakias brought everybody together and they worked together. But when they were shut out, that history and that part of their culture was impacted because they no longer had to share that resource. And then all of a sudden it's restored. How do we move forward? So from this, we developed a pretty lengthy list of priority projects, and I found myself really working towards generalizing some of these, because all the problems we saw weren't just one location. It was, well, if I find the areas that are good, that would be easier to mark out than the ones that are degrading. And provided a map of some of the locations, some of the pieces that had locations. One, and then we're gonna go through some of the pictures. We saw a lot of banks that had no riparian vegetation. And so this is up in the high country. You see no riparian vegetation. Before any restoration would be effective, grazing would need to be managed. This is in the lower part of the basin. So just outside of the town of San Luis, there's also communal grazing grounds that were traditionally used to store your horse in the summer, so you could go check your cattle up in the high grounds. This area not only is affected by grazing, but is also affected by reservoir operations, which in a matter of an hour goes from base flow to 100 CFS multiple times during the summer. There's remnants of historic structures that impact the floodplains and have left remnants of concrete and piles and berms that could be removed and floodplain connection restored, improving the vast meadow that is around here. The forests are overgrown. In 1960, Jack Taylor was a lumberman and started to clear a lot of the forests. And then through a variety of different owners in the 1990s, there was some other lawsuits having to do with clear-cut logging. And since about the mid-1990s, there's been little to no forest management on the property. There's trash in all of the arroyos. A landfill is not available in the watershed. And so it's about a 2-hour drive to get to the nearest landfill. And the transfer station is operated with very minimal hours. In addition, we have a few houses that are built on the banks of the creek. We have the Culebra going through a 4-foot gate and leaky floodgates on the canal. Large drop structures, your standard run-of-the-mill drop structure that diverts on both sides of the river. Leaky head gates that cause flooding in the winter. Water management and roads. Well-intentioned restoration projects that flatten slopes. And a great team to work with. So we had numerous project funders. This project ended up costing about $750,000 and was supported by the CWCD, Colorado Watershed Assembly, San Luis Valley Conservation Fund, Trinchera Blanca. The Costilla County Conservancy District was our client. The Sangre de Cristo National Heritage Area and the Colorado Department of Ag were all major supporters of the project. And that's where we'll leave it. Are there any questions?
Andrea, it's Brad. I've got a question.
Brad?
Morning, everybody. So where's it going now? I mean, are they going to start and implement some of these projects to try and improve the situation?
So the first thing to tackle is that the community doesn't have very many people. And so everybody wears about 10 hats. And so what we're working on right now and over the next month is hopefully joining forces with a local nonprofit to hire a watershed coordinator at least part-time in the basin.
With the hope that they'll try to get things organized and moving forward?
So we need somebody that can handle the paperwork for the grants. And so I need that point person, and then we're going to go after numerous grant funds.
Talk about
Interesting.
the priority or the demonstration watershed.
So one of the projects that I think would be a good place to start is developing a demonstration watershed, because they need an example. There's a lot of feeling of you can't tell me what to do. You can't tell me how to graze my cattle. You can't tell me where to cut wood. But if I can show them that things are better with grazing management, with forest management, then our likelihood of success is going to be a lot greater. And so each of the villages sits in a distinct basin. And so the community groups are actually defined by basin in acequia. And so I just have to get one basin to agree rather than everybody to move forward.
It's a great project.
Andrea and Greg, I noticed when you showed the regional curve really quickly, the drainage area, you have drainage area to 0.35 power. Did you guys have any idea of kind of what's drawn that having that response be so low on there with respect to
Diversions.
increase the drainage area?
It's diversions.
Diversions.
Yeah, I would definitely like to take a closer look at some of the regional curve stuff, because I think that you could probably split the two groups up into different elevations. If we go above the elevations, I'm guessing the curve is going to look different than if we go below those diversions.
Yeah, and how much did the rainfall differ in the entire watershed from headwaters to the higher drain order streams?
It's about half.
Okay.
So. Well, thank you, everybody, for getting up or jumping on this morning. Really appreciate, and I have really enjoyed this project and enjoy sharing everything that was done.
Thanks,
right.
Andrea.
Well, thank you, Greg. Thank you, Andrea. Appreciate it.
Yep,
Great
thank you, guys.
presentation, Andrea.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, folks. We're going to move on to the inspiration part of the talk today. And we're going to start off by a quick prayer, and then I'll introduce to you Justin Barrett, of which some of you know, and we're going to talk today about something that's kind of on his heart, and we'll move in through there. So, dear God, we're thankful for this time we have together. We're thankful for the opportunity to be able to share with others. Help us to be able to stay in a place where we can value sharing, where we can see you as larger, where we can have questions, where we can be in wonderment, and help us to be able to see the created world as bigger than we've seen it before, and help us to see you as bigger than what we've seen you before. We're amazed, and help us to stay ever more amazed. Amen.
Amen.
All right. So Justin's here with us today, Justin Barrett. Justin's been a close friend that I've worked with, and somebody that I've been blessed to kind of spend life with for the last 8-9 years-ish, somewhere time frame. Justin currently works in agriculture, helping his dad with a farm and ranch in Wetumpka, Alabama, and also works for the city of Wetumpka. So a man of multiple hats. And today, what we're going to be talking about is basically kind of something that he's had on his heart, of the desire of our hearts, and kind of what the desire of our hearts are. So Justin, with that, when you say desire of your hearts, what exactly do you mean by that?
I think that we all go through, as we go through life, is we have to sort out our wants and our needs and how we feel and how we think. And I think the desire of our heart is intertwined in all of that in some way, form or fashion,
So when you say our wants and our needs, growing up in kind of a religious culture, a lot of times I think of my needs as something that's okay, and my wants as being something that's maybe not so good.
That's right.
And how do you, what's your thoughts on what wants are compared to what needs are?
Needs are, I guess, what's essential for life. I guess the basic needs would be water and food, but also shelter and relationships and that kind of thing. And the wants are more, we think of them as more maybe luxury items or bucket list items, or maybe even to go as far as feeling security items, retirement plans. Those are kind of our wants as we go through life. Is, well, I want to be more secure, I want to be more financially stable, I want to be somebody that, anyway, I guess that's the.
So for the person, I would say, well, God's kind of designed me, and he's wired me with certain wants. Maybe that's okay that I want these things and elevate these things over the other things. And if he didn't wire me that way, then he wouldn't have wanted me to think that way. I mean, how do you balance the idea of when a want is something that is a gift or a blessing from God, opposed to a want being something that's selfishly motivated?
It's really hard to tell the difference between what's maybe a step of faith or selfish ambition, or like you're saying, a heart's desire, or I think it takes time to kind of understand that. And I think we listened to a thing a while back, and one thing that we got out, that you and I got out of it, was our truth. Our truth is our how was it worded? Is our let's see, what was that? What was it? It just left me.
We were
Truth. Anyway, I'll think of it in
Yeah.
a minute, but I think it takes time to discern what is actually what we're gifted to do and what we want to do or what we need to do. And I also think it takes community of friends encouraging you along the way and being able to speak truth to you, even when you're not necessarily wanting it or when you're not necessarily needing it or when you don't want to hear it or even when you do hear it. Just honest, open friends that really mean that really have or speaking out of a heart of love,
One of the things that I've struggled with in my Christian walk is when I see the Billy Grahams, when I see the Mother Teresas, when I see the folks that I'm in wonderment and awe of how they can live by faith so much there, that sometimes I find myself trying to emulate them that I was never wired to emulate.
Yeah.
And what does it mean to you to have a desire of your heart that's significantly different than somebody else and know that God can use that and you don't have to look like that person in the future?
Yeah, I one thing that I do struggle with a lot is comparison. It's comparing my life or my walk or my career with someone else's. I find security in maybe someone else approving me or someone else, or being like someone else because this worked for them. So I'm gonna just keep doing it, and the only way I can really, it's really uncomfortable to step out there on your own and by yourself because, I had a friend tell me that leadership sometimes is lonely because you don't really know what the next step is. You just feel like this is the direction we need to go. And, like you said, it's easy to idolize Billy Graham or Mother Teresa or these people that have a big following and say, well, that's what I want to. Instead of just saying, you know what, God's wired me this way. God's has a plan for me, a specific plan for me, a unique plan for me. And walking in that with the security and the purpose of that plan is sometimes hard to do on your own.
I think sometimes God will throw a desire in our heart, and it's something that has wired us so uniquely than anybody else. But yet we don't quite have the trust that God has a plan for us through it. So we look at how other people have done it and try to replicate what they have done when we're completely wired differently. We'd be like plugging a 12-volt battery into a wall and expecting it's going to charge.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that we had heard yesterday in this, we had shared some time yesterday learning about the story of Ruth. And one of the things that comes out of that is this idea of trust.
Right.
And I think part of the desires of our heart is this constant prayer and trust in that God created me this way. God has a plan for me this way. And I can trust that God is faithful, even though I don't completely understand this plan. I feel like I should be like this person over here.
Right.
So what are some of the, when you think of the desires of your heart right now, I imagine there's multiple categories. There's a category of a desire of your heart that's kind of family related. There's a desire of your heart that's kind of big picture related, kind of career related type of things, and then desires of your hearts that are more kind of eternal focused. So when you look at, we'll kind of start on the easy level. When you look at your desires of your heart from a career focus, how does that frame you? Like when you look at, hey, this is kind of what my desire is for a career focus, how do you find peace in that situation? Or how do those desires frame you differently in your day-to-day activity, or do they?
I think that that's an interesting question, but I think that looking, we're from the Western world, our career, we're driven by, or a lot of times we're driven by an end goal. Like, I want to work 25 years and retire, or sometimes set your mind on a goal that's far out there, and that you do anything and everything you can within your power to reach that goal. And I don't some that to me, I think is I don't know. That's
So sometimes, like in the workforce, it seems like our heart's desires become more of a goal of achievement
right,
than a desire of the heart at times.
right,
So it's not just like this desire, I want to do this. It's like, I want to do this so I can be this.
hmm,
So it gets me this definition at some sort of level. I know I struggle with it constantly because I'm like, well, am I a good engineer? Am I a bad engineer? And honestly, at any given day, I could say I'm probably a good engineer or a bad engineer. And if I convince myself the right way, I can get myself feeling pretty bad about what I did. And if I convince myself the right way, I can feel like I'm 10 foot tall and bulletproof.
right,
So the desires of my heart on the idea that, hey, I want to do engineering is different than desires of my heart of I want to be defined by engineering.
right,
So I think a lot of times when we think of the desires of our hearts, we think of the desires, I think of the desires of my heart as a set purpose and goal, opposed to being an activity or a gift
right,
that I've been given. So if I have this desire of my heart that is kind of a gift of how I was designed, but then my end goal is still more eternally focused. So the idea of who am I truly defined as? Am I
Right.
truly defined as an engineer? Am I truly defined as a father? Am I truly defined as some sort of in between? Or am I truly defined as something that's a lot harder to take down than that?
right,
Am I truly defined as a loved child of God? Am I truly defined as somebody that is loved and that the creator of 100 billion galaxies
yeah,
would actually want to care about me?
right,
So when we think about the desires of your heart, like if I was to say to you, Justin, what's the desires of your heart? What type of things are going to jump out at you? When I say, hey, what's your desires of your heart? What would you say?
yeah. I think, to be a good father, to be a good friend, to be a good husband, a brother, a son, dad, those kind of things is what you truly desire. Like I said, it like you were saying, it's kind of like an onion you peel back as you get further, even to, the Bible speaks about the heart being deceitful above all things, and that God gives us the desires of our heart. So how do we resolve that dichotomy? And the desire to be a good friend and a father is is good, right? It's good.
Yeah.
That's obviously coming from somewhere else, but desire to be secure and to be known by the world, but it is maybe
Even
in religious terms something that's it could be seen as
even
prideful.
even to be defined as a good father, I
That's
would
right.
say it's prideful.
That's right.
Yeah. And it's not saying that what you're doing is not good. It's loving others.
Yeah,
It's how God created us.
Yeah.
It's what we're supposed to be doing is this kind of reckless love of others. But once we come back and define ourselves as I'm that guy that recklessly loves others, it's a sin. It's a miss of the
right.
mark.
That's right.
Opposed to us saying I'm that guy that's kind of, probably a little bit goofy, but God used me to do something amazing that I couldn't have done on my own,
Yeah.
which is loving others and being up at 3 a.m. in the morning with Hardy and when I didn't really want to be up at 3 a.m. in the
Yeah.
morning or whatever that story was. So what would you say to somebody that says, I'm having a real hard time even knowing if I have any desires in my heart?
I would start by saying that God does know you and he does have a plan for you. Even when it doesn't seem overly evident, and that you do have you do have a heart's desire. It's whether or not we're listening to it. And you know, scripture says that God writes it on our hearts, that we know there's something that we're seeking after, and therefore we know there's a higher purpose that we're doing that for. So I think that, for me, when I get really, really, really busy or really, really tuned into something that I want to be doing, sometimes I don't hear the purpose and the desires of what God has made me for. So I would say to be open. Number one, be open to knowing that there's a purpose, but then also just be still and start walking in that direction.
I think for me, my heart's desire, one of the things that I think about is I want something, and then my next thought is, oh, I'm being selfish.
Yeah.
So then it's like, well, I want to beat down the thing that I want something, but God's not surprised by the fact that I want that thing. And maybe God can use that thing, but I put God in this little box where God's kind of as fickle as me. God's kind of as judgmental as I am. And I think that God thinks the way that I think, opposed to me just having a hint of the fact that God is so much larger than me, and he can use that desire that could be selfish also to his glory.
Yeah.
I struggle with that a lot because, generally you're a father, you're a trash can. So for anybody that's not a father on the line, when you have multiple kids, you kind of end up being a trash can. Any leftover food, they just bring it to you and say, "Here, Dad, here, have this." Even my youngest daughter comes up and says, "Hey, Daddy, trash can, here you go."
Yeah.
And so there's that idea that when doing that task, it's like, well, I really like a steak, but I guess I'll eat macaroni and cheese.
Yeah.
Because it's in my best interest. And it's this idea of not being selfish and not kind of looking out for yourself and making sure to serve others. But sometimes I think God wires us with a desire that's so uniquely. And when we can't trust that he has wired us with that desire and he can use that desire for something good, we sometimes lean back on our own understanding of, well, as long as I'm kind towards other people, then that's probably all the more that God ever has in store for what we're doing, opposed to God may have a plan for us that is using desires of our hearts in a different way to still be kind to people.
That's right.
But in an abundant way. Sometimes we fall into a Christian life where we know what we're not supposed to do. So it becomes kind of stereotypically boring. It's like on The Simpsons, the neighbor to Homer Simpson, howdy doodly do. And he's like this super boring guy that everybody kind of makes fun of, but he's super kind guy and stuff. And he has a cross on the back of his station wagon and stuff. And the idea is we fall into this boring life where the desires of our hearts are so repressed because we think it has to be selfishness. Whereas the desires of our heart, if they're turned to God, sometimes are what makes our story so unique and can glorify God in ways that we could have never understood before.
Right. I think that you've been a part of a lot of these discussions that I've had, but like you said, we even trick ourselves into, I really enjoy doing stream work and engineering work, but also enjoy farming and cattle. And I feel like sometimes it's a tug of war of, okay, Justin, what are you going to choose today? Are you going to choose to be engineer? Or are you going to choose to be farmer? And I think kind of the desire, the wanting to be defined, wanting to have a direction, wanting to say, okay, I'm going to do engineering and then I'm going to retire and be a farmer, instead of just, sometimes it's literally, all right, get out of bed and do what's right in front of you and pay attention to the person right in front of you and how the world wants to define that. outside of our relationship or what we're doing here, is really hard to overcome, because like you're saying, we want to get attached to something and be defined by that, rather than, so these are the interests that I'm in, and God wants me to use these, and like you're saying, for his glory, on a daily basis. So it's a daily thing that you wake up and it's all right, I got to do this, do this again. But our hearts a lot of times want to be secure in, all right, I'm going to retire in 25 years and all my finances and all my woes and all my troubles are going to be taken care of, when each day has enough troubles of its own. We can't worry about tomorrow. And going back to trust, to trust that where God has you and where each day takes you, has a purpose, and that purpose is to love other people, not to gain something for yourself. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of, like you said, the struggle, the tension that we all live in, or that I live in anyway, is, all right, how am I going to justify my decisions today? How am I going to do, if somebody asks me, hey, Justin, what do you do? How am I going to define myself to them?
Yeah.
It's just I don't have any of the answers. I'm just trying to tell you that I'm struggling through this, and hopefully it helps somebody
And
that's in that same tension.
justify, the definition of justify is really changing your label, right?
You're right.
So it's like saying, you say, well, David, I'm an engineer, farmer, father, and happen to do this to him. And I come up to you and say, well, it doesn't sound like you're very well focused. Can't you just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and pick one thing and go do it?
Yeah.
And then you come back and you have to justify it, so that my view of you is that you're right. So I'm saying, no, that's wrong. What you're doing is wrong.
Yeah.
You should do it different. But justification is saying, no, what I'm doing, this is why I'm doing it this way. And then my approval for you is, oh, well, that's okay. You get to see your family more and so
Right.
forth. The scriptures tell us how we're justified.
Right.
It says we're justified through grace.
Yeah. By faith.
Grace, which is an
Yeah.
unmerited favor.
Yeah.
It's not like I did something awesome, like I gave you a quarter and a Dr. Pepper, and now you owe me something. It means that I gave you absolutely nothing, and for some reason you found favor in me, and we were justified. And that's how God says that we are justified to God through grace.
Right.
And it's only the grace, the only way we can be justified through grace is through faith.
Right.
So it's the idea that we have to believe that God's grace is sufficient for this. I think part of what we look at it when we look at the desires of our heart is that concept of justification. How does the world see?
Yeah.
And that's what holds us back to really chasing the good desires of our hearts. Now, the bad desires of our hearts that are sins,
Right.
that's a completely different thing. That's selfishness. And I think there's a fair number of people that struggle with, am I being selfish or not? But I think what we're talking to today is the people that kind of know when they're being selfish for the most part,
Right.
and struggle with the fact that, can I chase a desire, and has God wired me for desire that maybe every time that I see that desire, it is not selfish, but God has a plan and purpose in place for that.
That's right.
We know God can redeem crazy things. I mean, God can allow people to do things that are outside the law, and then people do things that they're told not to do, but then God still redeems it and makes something amazing out of it.
Yeah.
So that's just a constant story of what happens. So for us, sometimes it's just trusting that God's good.
Yeah.
And I know I kind of know this answer, but I'm going to prompt you for this just in case. I've found myself a lot of times in life wanting to know what the next steps were.
Yeah.
And a lot of times wanting to know, and I like the idea of, okay, well, we'll do this step, then maybe we'll do this step, then maybe we'll do this step, then maybe we'll do this step, and then we get ourselves into a nice little spiral and keep on going to the next step, the next step, the next step. Have you ever had clear direction that was 5 steps out, 5 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon, 5 steps out, that actually went the way that you ever imagined?
No, absolutely not.
Me neither. you know, and we spend so much time thinking about that second and third step, don't we?
Yeah,
When a lot of times the step that's right in front of us, when we're seeking God's will, is so clear on what we need to do.
yeah.
But usually what scares us is
It's the
the
second,
second step,
third, that's
and the
right.
third step,
What's gonna happen
because we
next?
have to understand what that is.
Yeah.
Do you have what you sent us, what you sent to me this morning?
Yeah,
That you can read kind of the top of that?
the first paragraph.
Yeah, just the first paragraph.
You don't have to understand everything in your life because your Lord of wisdom and grace understands it all. It is a paradox that many of us don't handle well. We were created by God to be rational human beings, and we carry around with us a desire to know and understand. But we must not forget that we will never experience inner peace simply because all our questions have been answered. Biblical faith is not irrational, but it takes us beyond our ability to reason. As believers in our identity as God's image bearers and truthfulness of his word, we do recognize that it is important to study, to learn, and to examine, to evaluate, and to know. But we are not rationalists. We do not trust our reason more than we trust God. We do not reject what God says is true when it doesn't make sense to us. And we know that God's secret will leaves us with mysteries in our own lives. Mysteries that even with the best of our theology, we won't be able to solve. Biblical literacy does not dispel all confusion and mystery from your life, because while God reveals his will for you in the Bible, he does not reveal all the things he will do in your life for your good and his glory. God surprises you.
I think that's it. I mean, God surprises us. We're in a point we can't understand God, but he gives us desires, and he gives us desires that can be used for good. And it's so unique the way that he has a plan and purpose that he has masterfully crafted for Justin and his life is different than for me and my life. But it's equally as amazing and wonderful and awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
So with that this week, guys, we hope that you are able to see kind of God as a bigger, more complex being than you've ever seen him before. I hope you're able to kind of look at some of the desires of your heart and say, well, God, if this is something that you have for me, then I know you can do it. And if not, that's okay.
Yeah.
Is there anything anybody would like to kind of mention or add, or that we stimulated, or any thoughts or concerns this morning? All right. Well, that was a lot of easy questions.
Yeah, got through that pretty easy.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, guys. We appreciate you being on the call this week. Have a great week, everybody. Feel free to check out the video when it gets online later this week. Thanks a lot. Bye. Hey, Brad, are you still on the line? Thanks, Justin. Appreciate it, man. Good job.